There is a quiet sorrow that comes with becoming stronger, and few speak of it honestly. We are taught to admire discipline as though it were a shining virtue, a noble road paved with applause and admiration. But discipline is rarely beautiful in the beginning. It is lonely, it is misunderstood. It asks you to walk away from comforts that others still call happiness. It demands silence where others seek noise, restraint where others chase indulgence, and patience where the world worships immediacy. The darker truth is this: the moment you begin to govern yourself, you will begin to lose certain people. Not because you have become cruel, but because you have become clear. Your refusal to remain weak will offend those who have made peace with their weakness. Your consistency will disturb those who survive on excuses. Your growth will quietly expose the stagnation around you. Strength is not merely the building of muscle or the sharpening of ambition. It is the painful act of saying no. To comfort, to distraction, to approval, and often to belonging. Many would rather remain accepted than become transformed. For acceptance is warm, and transformation is cold before it becomes glorious. And so discipline becomes a kind of separation. Not always dramatic, not always spoken, but deeply felt. The rooms remain the same. The face is familiar, yet something has shifted. You begin to realize that not everyone can accompany you into the life you are trying to build. Some only love the version of you that asked for less from yourself. To become stronger is to accept this grief without bitterness. It is to understand that not every distance is a loss, and not every loneliness is emptiness. Sometimes solitude is simply the evidence that you have stopped negotiating with your own potential. Discipline has a peculiar way of uncovering truths that comfort keeps hidden. So long as a man remains unchanged, he can move easily among those who prefer ease over effort, delay over decision, and excuses over responsibility. There is a strange harmony in shared weakness. People feel safe among those who ask little of themselves, because such company demands nothing uncomfortable in return. But the moment a person begins to rise, to wake earlier, to speak less and do more, to choose principle over pleasure, something invisible begins to shift. It is not always announced. No great argument is required. No dramatic betrayal needs to occur. Often it happens in silence. The people who once laughed with you begin to feel uneasy around you. Your presence becomes a mirror they did not ask to look into. Your discipline reminds them of promises they abandoned, of goals they postponed, of the better self they quietly buried beneath habits of convenience. And most people do not thank the mirror that reveals them. They resent it. This is why discipline often feels like rejection, though in truth it is revelation. It does not create distance as much as it exposes distance that was already there. Many relationships survive not because they are deep, but because they are undisturbed. They are built upon mutual permission to remain the same. The friendship is comfortable because neither person threatens the other's complacency. But once one begins to change, the agreement is broken. Growth interrupts the peace that stagnation had disguised as loyalty. There are people who love your potential in theory, but dislike your discipline in practice. They applaud success from a distance, yet grow uncomfortable when they witness the daily sacrifices required to reach it. They enjoy the idea of your improvement so long as it asks nothing of them. But real discipline is inconvenient to observe. It forces questions, it unsettles excuses, it makes laziness feel louder. Your refusal to waste yourself becomes an accusation, even if you never intended it to be, and so some will withdraw. Some will mock what they secretly admire. Others will call you distant when, in truth, you have simply become deliberate. They will say you have changed, and they will mean it as criticism, as though remaining the same were a moral achievement. But what is maturity if not change? What is wisdom if not the courage to outgrow what once kept us small? Yet discipline also reveals something beautiful. It shows you who remains. Not everyone is threatened by your growth. A few will respect it, even if it convicts them. A few will stand near your fire rather than run from its heat. These are rare people, those who value truth more than comfort, who would rather be challenged than merely entertained. They do not love the weaker version of you because it was easier to keep. They love the becoming, even when it is inconvenient. Such people are often quieter than the rest. They do not flatter endlessly, nor do they cling desperately. They understand that love is not always agreement, and loyalty is not measured by how well someone helps you stay comfortable. Sometimes the truest form of care is found in those who refuse to help you remain small. They recognize that discipline is not pride, but responsibility, the decision to stop wasting the life entrusted to you. To become disciplined, then, is not simply to build habits. It is to discover the architecture of your relationships. It shows you which bonds were built on convenience and which were built on character. It teaches that some people were companions only for the season of your hesitation, and when hesitation ends, so does their place beside you. This realization can feel cruel at first. We mourn not only people, but the illusion we had of them. We grieve the belief that everyone who walked with us intended to walk far. But discipline offers a harsher mercy. It refuses to let us mistake proximity for purpose. Not everyone close to you is called to go where you are going. Some were only there to accompany the version of you that no longer exists. There is a season in every serious life when strength feels less like triumph and more like exile. We are often told that becoming stronger will earn admiration, respect, and belonging, as though growth were a public celebration waiting patiently for our arrival. But the truth is far less comforting. Strength creates distance long before it creates respect. Before people admire your discipline, they often misunderstand it. Before they applaud your boundaries, they question your absence. Before they respect your standards, they resent the inconvenience of them. The early stages of strength are rarely attractive to others. They are quiet, repetitive, and often invisible. Rising before dawn does not look impressive when no one sees it. Refusing distractions does not feel noble when it makes you appear distant. Saying no to temporary pleasures does not earn applause from those who believe happiness must always be immediate. In fact, strength often appears from the outside as arrogance, withdrawal, or unnecessary severity. People rarely recognize sacrifice while it is still sacrifice. They only praise it once it becomes success. This is because most people judge discipline by its outcomes, not by its demands. They celebrate the result and ignore the loneliness that produced it. They admire the confidence but overlook the years of self-confrontation. They envy the peace without understanding the battles required to protect it. And while you are still in the process of becoming, you may find yourself standing in strange silence, unsupported by those who will later claim they always believed in you. Strength separates because it changes what you tolerate. It sharpens your sense of what deserves your time, your attention, your energy. Things that once felt harmless begin to feel expensive. Conversations that revolve around complaint, habits that lead nowhere, relationships sustained only by convenience. All of them start to weigh heavier than before. It is not that you become superior, it is that you become aware. You begin to notice how much of life is spent preserving comfort rather than pursuing truth. This awareness is unsettling to others. When you stop participating in what once bonded you, people assume rejection. If you no longer waste your evenings in the same distractions, they call you detached. If you protect your peace instead of explaining yourself endlessly, they call you cold. If you refuse to shrink yourself for the sake of familiarity, they call you changed, as though growth were betrayal. But often what they mourn is not your absence, but the loss of easy access to the old version of you. Respect is a strange thing. It rarely arrives at the beginning of discipline. At first, your consistency is irritating. Your boundaries are inconvenient. Your refusal to compromise makes others uncomfortable, because it exposes how easily they have compromised themselves. People are often offended by the standards they secretly wish they had the courage to keep. Your strength reminds them that weakness was not always inevitable. It was often chosen. Yet over time, something shifts. The same people who questioned your solitude begin to notice your stability. The same ones who mocked your restraint begin to trust your judgment. What first appeared as distance begins to reveal itself as integrity. Respect grows slowly because it is born from observation, not from words. It takes time for others to see that your discipline was not performance, but conviction. But by then, something in you has changed as well. You no longer crave their approval the way you once did. Strength teaches a difficult lesson. If your peace depends on being understood by everyone, you will remain weak forever. Maturity requires the courage to be misread. It demands the willingness to continue doing what is right without the guarantee of immediate validation. It asks you to choose character over applause. This is why the path of strength can feel so lonely. Not because people vanish all at once, but because your relationship with belonging changes. You stop measuring connection by how easily people accept you and begin measuring it by whether they can endure your truth. You realize that respect built on performance is fragile, but respect built on consistency survives silence. And so strength often begins with distance, not because you wished for separation, but because growth made certain closeness impossible. Some people only know how to love the version of you that required less courage. They are comfortable with your potential so long as it remains unrealized. But when you begin to become someone disciplined, someone deliberate, someone unwilling to negotiate with weakness, they feel the loss before they understand the reason. There is a strange fellowship in comfort, a quiet alliance formed not by purpose but by permission. People gather easily around what asks little of them. Shared distraction creates quick intimacy. Mutual excuses feel like understanding. It is easy to feel close to those who never challenge your habits, who laugh with you while both of you postpone the same responsibilities, who call avoidance peace and indulgence freedom. Comfort has a way of making stagnation feel like belonging. This is why growth can feel like betrayal, both to others and to yourself. The moment you begin to choose discipline over ease, you disturb an unspoken agreement. You are no longer participating in the comfortable rituals that once held the connection together. You leave the late-night distractions, the endless complaints, the habits of delay, the gentle lies people tell themselves so they may sleep without confronting what they are becoming. And in leaving these things, you often feel as though you are leaving people, even when your intention was only to leave weakness behind. Comfort bonds people because it protects them from reflection. When everyone around you is equally uncommitted, no one feels the pressure to rise. There is relief in shared mediocrity. It allows people to mistake company for progress. A group can remain together for years without anyone becoming better, simply because everyone has agreed silently not to demand more from one another. This kind of closeness feels warm, but it is often built on mutual surrender rather than mutual growth. Discipline interrupts that warmth. It asks inconvenient questions. Why are you wasting your time? Why are you afraid of solitude? Why do you keep choosing what weakens you and calling it normal? These are not questions most people wish to entertain, especially from someone they once considered equal in their avoidance. Your growth becomes uncomfortable because it proves change is possible. It removes the excuse that everyone is trapped, and so distance begins. Not always through conflict, but through contrast. You stop finding joy in what once filled your evenings. Conversations that once seemed harmless begin to feel heavy with repetition. The same jokes, the same complaints, the same promises to start tomorrow. What once felt like friendship now feels like a waiting room where no one intends to leave. You are still present, but inwardly, something has already departed. Others notice this before you speak of it. They sense your hesitation, your refusal to laugh at what no longer amuses you, your absence from places where you once belonged easily. They may accuse you of changing, but what they often mean is that you no longer make their comfort feel safe. Your discipline introduces tension into spaces built on convenience. It is difficult to remain careless beside someone who has become intentional. Yet growth does not always require dramatic separation. Sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is simply the recognition that not every bond is meant to survive your becoming. Some relationships were formed around who you were when you feared your own potential. They were sustained by your willingness to remain smaller than you were capable of being. Once that willingness disappears, the relationship has nothing left to hold it together. This realization can be painful because comfort often disguises itself as love. We mistake familiarity for loyalty. We assume that because someone has been near us, they are meant to go with us. But proximity is not always partnership. Some people are companions only for the version of you that sought permission rather than purpose. They loved your accessibility, your softness toward your own excuses, your readiness to stay where everyone else stayed. Growth asks for a different kind of love, one rooted not in shared weakness, but in shared responsibility. It seeks people who are not threatened by your standards, who do not interpret your boundaries as rejection, who understand that becoming better is not pride but stewardship. These people are rarer because they are willing to be uncomfortable. They do not need you to remain small so they can feel secure. The tragedy is that many choose comfort because it feels like connection, while growth often feels like abandonment. To leave behind familiar weakness can feel like loneliness, even when it is the first honest act of self-respect. We grieve the warmth of old habits because they were once our shelter, forgetting that some shelters are also prisons. There are moments when discipline requires you to stand apart, not because you despise others, but because you can no longer pretend that comfort is harmless. You begin to see that what once bonded you was not always truth, but shared avoidance. And once you have seen that clearly, returning becomes harder than leaving. Standards are quiet things at first. They do not announce themselves with noise or demand attention from the room. They begin privately, in the small and almost invisible decisions, waking when it would be easier to sleep, remaining silent when pride wants the final word, refusing what is pleasurable because it is harmful, choosing what is right though it offers no immediate reward. A standard is not a performance for others, it is a covenant with oneself. Yet the moment it becomes consistent, others begin to feel it. People are rarely disturbed by ambition in theory. They admire the language of discipline when it remains abstract, harmless, and distant. Everyone praises self-control until it appears beside them in ordinary life. Then it becomes inconvenient. Your standards, when lived rather than spoken, create a silent confrontation. They reveal what others tolerate in themselves, and few things offend more deeply than an uninvited reminder of neglected responsibility. A man who keeps his word unsettles those who have made peace with excuses. A woman who protects her peace irritates those who survive on emotional chaos. A person who refuses gossip does not need to preach against it. Their silence is sermon enough. Standards do not accuse by speaking, they accuse by existing. This is why people often respond not with admiration, but with discomfort disguised as criticism. They will call you rigid because you no longer bend for every passing desire. They will call you distant because you refuse to make intimacy out of dysfunction. They will call you proud because you no longer seek validation from the same places that once kept you dependent. It is easier for people to label discipline as arrogance than to admit their own relationship with compromise. There is something almost tragic in how people defend their chains. We imagine that weakness is always hated by the one who carries it, but often it is protected with great tenderness. Habits that destroy us become familiar enough to feel like identity. Excuses become companions. Comfort becomes a religion. And when someone nearby begins to live differently, it threatens more than routine. It threatens the story people tell themselves about why they cannot change. Your standards become offensive because they expose possibility. They prove that another way exists. If you can say no, then perhaps they could have as well. If you can remain disciplined, perhaps their surrender was not fate but choice. This is not a pleasant realization, and most would rather resent the witness than confront the truth. It is less painful to call you extreme than to question their own indifference. This is why raising your standards often narrows your circle, not because you intended to judge others, but because clarity creates separation. The places where you once belonged begin to feel strange. Conversations built entirely on complaint become exhausting. Relationships sustained by convenience begin to weaken. You realize that much of what people call connection is merely mutual permission to remain unchanged. Once you stop participating in that permission, the bond loosens. There is also the subtle temptation to lower yourself again for the sake of peace. To laugh at what no longer feels harmless, to return to habits you have outgrown, to make yourself smaller so others feel less threatened. We often call this humility, but sometimes it is only fear wearing polite clothes. It is the fear of being misunderstood, of standing alone, of being accused of thinking too highly of oneself simply for refusing what once made life smaller. But true humility is not the abandonment of standards. It is holding them without self-righteousness. It is understanding that discipline does not make you superior, only responsible. You are not better than others because you fight your weakness. You are simply unwilling to let it rule you. Standards are not a throne from which to look down, but a guardrail to keep from falling. The difficulty lies in maintaining this without bitterness. When people resist your boundaries or mock your restraint, the temptation is to answer with contempt. Yet contempt is only pride in harsher clothing. Discipline loses its beauty when it becomes a weapon of superiority. The strongest people are often the gentlest, because they understand how difficult change truly is. They do not hate those still trapped in comfort. They simply refuse to join them there, and still offense will come. Some people will always interpret your self-respect as rejection. They will prefer the version of you that was easier to influence, easier to access, easier to keep comfortably unfinished. They mistake your boundaries for distance because they only understood closeness through convenience. Your standards interrupt that arrangement, and what is interrupted is rarely praised in the moment. Loneliness is one of the most misunderstood companions of transformation. We are taught to fear it as though it were evidence of failure, a sign that something has gone wrong, that we have somehow been abandoned or left behind. From childhood, we are trained to seek belonging before truth, approval before conviction. To be alone is treated as a kind of wound. Yet many of the deepest changes in a human life begin precisely there, in the quiet places where applause cannot follow. Transformation is rarely crowded. It does not happen in the noise of constant validation or in the safety of familiar habits. It begins in private, where no one sees the struggle between the person you have been and the person you are trying to become. It is in these silent moments, rising early while others sleep, refusing temptations no one else knows about, choosing discipline when comfort whispers louder, that character is formed. The world often celebrates the finished result, but the making of strength happens where no audience remains. This solitude feels painful because much of our identity is borrowed from the company we keep. We learn who we are by reflection, by seeing ourselves through the eyes of others. When old relationships begin to change, when familiar places no longer feel like home, it can seem as though we are losing ourselves. In truth, we may be discovering ourselves for the first time without the noise of constant permission. Loneliness often arrives when you stop negotiating with your own weakness. The habits that once made you feel included begin to feel expensive. The conversations built on gossip, the friendships sustained by mutual avoidance, the routines that kept everyone comfortable but no one growing, these things lose their charm. You are still invited, still present perhaps, but inwardly you are standing at a distance. What once felt like belonging now feels like compromise. Others may not understand this distance. They may call you withdrawn, too serious, changed, and perhaps you are changed. Maturity often looks like distance to those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. People grow comfortable with the version of you that asks little of them. The self that tolerated what should have been confronted. The self that confused availability with love. When that version begins to disappear, they interpret it as loss. And it is a loss. Not every loneliness is noble, but some loneliness is necessary. There are seasons when solitude is not punishment but protection. To remain constantly surrounded while becoming stronger can be impossible if the crowd is committed to your weakness. Some rooms cannot contain your growth because they were built around your hesitation. To leave them feels like grief because you are not only losing people, you are losing the identity that existed among them. This grief should not be dismissed lightly. Discipline is not merely the rejection of pleasure, it is often the mourning of familiarity. You miss the ease of old habits, the warmth of unquestioned acceptance, the comfort of never being challenged to become more. Even destructive things can feel tender when they are familiar enough. The heart does not always distinguish between what is safe and what is simply known. Yet loneliness has its own strange mercy. It strips away illusion. In silence, you begin to hear your own convictions rather than the borrowed voices of expectation. You discover whether your principles were truly yours or merely performances for approval. Solitude reveals what remains when no one is watching. It asks whether you still choose discipline when there is no admiration attached to it, whether you still pursue truth when it costs you companionship. There is dignity in that question. A life built only on external acceptance is fragile, always bending toward the nearest applause. But a person who has endured loneliness and remained faithful to what matters becomes difficult to shake. Their peace is not dependent on popularity. Their strength is not borrowed from the crowd. They have learned that being understood by everyone is not the same as being honest with oneself. And often, on the other side of this loneliness, something better appears. Not larger crowds, but clearer company. The people who remain, or the people you eventually find, are different. They are not attracted by convenience, but by character. They do not require you to shrink in order to stay close. They respect silence, boundaries, and the difficult work of becoming. Such relationships are fewer, but they are real. The price of transformation is often the temporary emptiness between who you were and who you are becoming. It feels like standing in a corridor with doors closing behind you and none yet opened ahead. Most people retreat here, choosing familiar weakness over uncertain growth, because loneliness convinces them they are lost. But sometimes that empty corridor is not abandonment at all. It is simply the space required for a new self to emerge.